Chapter 4, Part 2, Workforce Safety and Wellness. As we move on, we want to talk about stress management, and PTSD within EMS. This is a section from an article that was published on December 29th of 2018 by Don Dow. Today, EMS providers respond to more calls per 24-hour shift than their predecessors and perform more invasive procedures with newer medications and equipment. They complete more documentation, deal with a public that's more demanding, and have their skills and performance reviewed by medical directors who hold their licenses to function. Violence in their jobs is a constant, and shortages in many places keep their workloads and overtime high. It's no surprise that emergency services personnel are at a higher risk for stress-related disease and death than almost any other occupation in the world. Paramedics can experience multiple traumatic events. Examples: incidents involving children, burns, gunshots, mass casualties, in a single shift. Extrapolating that, an individual could experience anywhere from 500 to more than 3,000 traumatic events during a 20-year career. Stress may also cause poor quality service to the public and resulting financial costs through lawsuits from patients who felt their service was inappropriate. So again, this is from EMSworld.com, written by Don Dow. This is something that's definitely has been discussed over the past 5 to 10 years, but in the last couple of years is bringing more attention, and it's probably because of this study that I'm about to speak about here. I'm calling it the new white paper, but it is titled the Ruderman White Paper on Mental Health and Suicide of First Responders. In summary, the paper explains that in first responders, suicide is a result of mental illness, including depression and PTSD, which stems from constant exposure to death and destruction and survivor's guilt. In 2017, there were at least 103 firefighter EMS suicides and 140 police officer suicides, the report states. In contrast, 93 firefighters and 129 police officers actually just died in the line of duty. The Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance estimates that approximately 40% of firefighter suicides are reported. Only 40%. If these estimates are accurate, the actual number of 2017 suicides would be approximately equal to 257 suicides. So this is something that we definitely need to think about, and that we should put to the forefront of our minds, and we really need to change some culture and some tradition within the EMS and fire services, and start to think about our mental health. Unfortunately, as paramedics, you will be in charge of a lot of bad things in reference to traumatic incidents that you will remember for the rest of your life. And you know that. You've already been on a truck. You're an EMT. And a lot of you have seen some really bad stuff. There may be a few of you who have yet to really see anything that's really that scarring, but you will. It's coming. And truthfully, it only takes one or two. However, per these studies, we have a potential as EMS providers, if you work in a busier service, to see a minimum of 500 traumatic events. So that's one thing that we really need to start thinking about. And if your mental health starts to deteriorate, your physical and emotional health are shortly thereafter. So we want to define post-traumatic stress disorder. It is defined as an anxiety disorder at this time, but the DSM, that's the body over classifications of psychiatric illness. So they are thinking about actually giving it its own designation. But at this point in time, it's an anxiety disorder that develops following exposure to traumatic events. Recurrent, unwanted, distressing memories of the traumatic event, reliving traumatic event as if it were happening again, also flashbacks, recurring and unsettling dreams about traumatic events, and severe emotional distress or physical reactions to something that reminds the person of the event. So unfortunately, we are around trauma and despair and destruction a lot. And in my anecdotal experience, you'll see that a lot more than you see the good stuff. So let's talk about death and dying and the stages of grief. So again, we're around it a lot, and you do have to think about cultural considerations. In this lecture, we're primarily talking about what being in the environment so frequently does to the paramedic. However, I do want to go ahead and address how to speak to a patient who has just, their loved one has just died, and it's your responsibility to tell them, or it's your responsibility to call it in the field, call the time of death. So you do have to think about cultural considerations. I know that there have been times where I've run what, that the police department was considering an obvious death, and we get there, and sure enough, the patient or the person was deceased, but the family members brought him to the garage and had him covered, and they had candles lit all around him, and that is their culture. So that was, as far as an investigation standpoint, that kind of threw things off for the police officer, but it also kind of made me concerned of, all right, can I check him, feel for a pulse, so on and so forth. So, I discussed it with the family members, and it was fine. But, those are things that you have to think about. What are the different processes and traditions and cultures for people who die? So the Kubler-Ross stages of grief are as follows. There are 5 major ones: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So examples of each: denial would be this isn't happening to me. And then the anger would be, why me? You're angry at God or whatever being you believe in, or you're angry at just luck. Bargaining, or, okay, all right, I get it. I get that this is happening to me, but just let me do this first, or let me try this. Okay. And then there's depression, which kind of ties in with anger, and says, okay, but I haven't accomplished this yet, and I'm sad. I have regrets. And then you have acceptance at some point, which is, all right, I'm okay with it. I'm not afraid anymore. It's going to happen. So there are a couple of things that I want to just make this realistic about. First off, this doesn't only happen with death. This can happen with things such as a diagnosis of cancer. This can happen with people who have a medical condition, and it doesn't always happen in this order. A person can go through anger first and be stuck in anger for a long time. Then they can go to depression, and then they can go to bargaining, then they can go to denial, and then maybe acceptance. It doesn't always happen necessarily in this order, but these are the 5 stages, and it is good to know them and be familiar with them so that you can understand what some of these patients, your partners, or some other people are going through. And also, when you see a traumatic event in the truck, in the field, you do go through these stages yourself. You have a lot of people who suffer with survivor's guilt and things of that nature will struggle with these things. So, because paramedics encounter death and dying so often, there is a mistaken belief that they handle it better. Well, that's not necessarily true. That we do an exceptional thing, but we're not superhuman. Now, I'm a firm believer that we are not heroes. The term hero is, reserved for people who have given their lives for something, who have died in the line of duty for something, fallen military, fire service personnel, law enforcement officers, or EMS personnel who died trying to render aid. But we do perform an exceptional job as long as we do it well and we do it the right way. But as I said, we are still human. Everyone still has a limit. Even if they have a concrete facade on the outside, they still have feelings. They have a heart. So, and grief is a feeling, and mourning is a process. And that's what we just talked about with the 5 stages. On initially hearing the news of a death or a diagnosis or any significantly life-changing event, a person experiences a paralyzing, totally incapacitating surge of grief. Wait until that that surge is past and the survivor is ready and able to receive information and make decisions. So whenever you do get called out to a potential obvious death, you check a pulse, you do all the things that you're supposed to do as the responding paramedic, and you give the news to the loved one or to the patient, or excuse me, the caller, that the patient has died. Let them go through the stages, get them some tissues, get them a glass of water, let them grieve for a minute, and then, go from there when it comes to signing your paperwork and going through all those processes. All right. So potentially, the loved ones can have intense feelings for 4 to 6 weeks. It could be loss, anger, resentment, sadness, guilt. So like I was saying, all those stages, they happen, but they may not happen in a perfect sequence, and they may not happen in a perfect time frame. But the key to the process of mourning is the passage of dates and anniversary. That's that if you can make it through those, you can make it through anniversaries, you can make it through, the big dates that make them think about that person. They can fill in the gaps in between a lot easier. Okay, so what to say? There is no script, but as I have mentioned time and time again, your emotional intelligence is going to be key whenever it comes to dealing with situations such as this. You have to be honest with people, and you cannot give them false hopes. You can't use flowery language. You can't assume whatever religion that you expect for them to have. You can't assume that they share your religious beliefs. You have to be very careful with what you say, but assess the scene and the people in each situation to determine the safest and most compassionate way to deliver the news. And again, there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Be empathetic for people. You have no choice to. Hopefully you don't have any choice, but understand why they are grieving, understand why they're going through what they're going through, but do not go through it with them in that moment. If you need to have a hard time on the way back to the station, or, with your partner at the station. Just don't share that. You have to be strong for that person in that moment. You never know how people will respond, even if you know them. So that's, people could respond with sheer anger and rage. So that's why we are talking about here, positioning yourself between the person and the door, just in case, they look at you and say, well, you didn't save them. Why couldn't you save them? Why couldn't you save my kid? Why couldn't you save my teenager? Or, she was only 30. She was pregnant, things like that. There could be a lot of anger, and you will be an easy target because, first off, it's your job to save people. Second off, you're the person there with them. So do not deliver the news to a large group. Find out who is who among the survivors. So if this is the son, this is the daughter, this is the mother, this is the wife, so on and so forth. But do not make assumptions. Take one of those people and find out who is who. Find out who needs to know the news, who needs to be making the decisions, and then address the closest survivor. If the survivor is alone, see if you can get their contacts and call for a friend, a neighbor, clergy member, relative, whatever that they can afford. And if they don't have any of that, you don't have to be in service right then and there. You can stay with PD because police department, SO, they're going to come and do their own report. You can stay with that person for a little bit. But, if you want to make a script about how to tell somebody that their loved one has died, introduce yourself. You can say paramedic, firefighter, Carrie. Careful choice of words. So you have to really think about what you are going to say to them. And there is no script. There is no... It doesn't. Every situation is going to be a little different, but you must use the words dead and died. You can't say they've passed on or they've left or that they're gone. Those are too open-ended. They are, and the patients sometimes, or the survivors will sometimes literally get fixated on the possibility that they're not dead yet. So also your body language. Again, utilize emotional intelligence and think about your body language, your facial expressions, and your gentle eye contact. Again, do not include statements or Don't make assumptions that the patients believe in God, that the survivors believe in God. Do not include statements about God's will or relief from pain or any subjective assumption, as that may lead to anger and lashing out against you. So the basic elements of what you're going to tell the person will involve, well, your loved one has died. There's nothing more that anybody else could have done. Myself and my EMS service, we are here and available to help you in any way that we can. And once you're ready, we'll talk about some procedures and some things that we need to do next. But what can I do for you right now? And in that moment, go ahead and, as long as the sheriff's department, police department, they're finished with what they need to do, go ahead and just kind of prepare the body. Make sure that the body of the individual is presentable and covered up, cleaned up. Try to give that loved one some time with them. So because the sooner that they start the grieving process, and if they see them, then the closure begins pretty much immediately. So when it's someone it can have a very powerful impact on your own emotions. So find a way to manage the stress and grief for your well-being, exercising, finding different ways to let the stress out. So stress is a non-specific response of the body to any demand. It's the interaction of events and capabilities of individuals to adjust to those events. A stressor is the stimulus that causes the stress. Stress is both beneficial and it's detrimental. You have two different kinds of stress. You have distress, which is negative stress, and eustress, which is good stress. Eustress would be, hey, I got a promotion at work. I have more responsibility. I want to do a good job. I feel the pressure of doing a good job. Distress is, hey, my loved one has a really bad diagnosis of a medical condition, and it's going to completely change our lives. So, that's those are the differences between the two. Adapting to stress. So people have defensive mechanisms or strategies. They have coping strategies, and they can utilize problem-solving skills. So whatever you do, just you try to move on. But still deal with the feelings and the problems. Don't just suppress them. Some common stressors within the EMS profession. You have administrative stressors, paperwork, mountains and mountains of paperwork, time management, organizational skills that if you haven't owned those skills yet, then you could really feel the weight and the gravity of that stress. Scene-related stressors, family members who are on scene and they're freaking out, they're yelling at you, that's my child, they're only 14, what are they, this can't be happening, what are you doing? Also emotional and physical stress. If you're packing all this stuff in and you're never letting it out, and then your way of letting it out isn't alcohol, it's not nicotine, but it just so happens to be food. So then your body starts to wear down. You start to kind of pad on some pounds and get a little more out of shape. Environmental stressors. So if everybody around the firehouse is feeling the same way, then, that's the environment that you're in. If it's nothing but negativity breeds negativity. So if the crew that you are with is a negative crew, it's going to tear you down. And also family relationships. So it's very rare, unless your family members have actually done this job before, they are going to have no single clue or idea what you are going through. They have no perception of what actually happens in the real world and what you see all day whenever you're at work. So be patient with them, but also understand that will be a stressor. And also your absence from them will cause stress as well. To manage stress, know what your stressors are. Know what affects you the most, and what affects you may not be what affects your partner or whoever's on your crew. Just know how to know what the stressors are for you and what affects you the most, and know the amount of stress that you can handle before it becomes a problem or before you need a break. Use stress management strategies that work for you. So if you know that going outside and running a 5K makes you feel better, go and do it. Make sure you don't skip it. Make sure it actually happens. If, like I said earlier, for me, woodworking, I love going out to the garage and just building stuff. That's mine. And I also love boxing. Boxing helps me. So, find what works for you, and use stress management strategies that work for you. So, whenever it comes to adapting to stress, you have to receive it, you have to process it, you have to dissipate it, and you have to think about the effects, the residual effects. So there are a couple of different phases of stress response that we want to talk about. The phases of stress response: stage 1, the alarm phase. That's going to be your fight or flight. That's the immediate, the body physically and rapidly prepares to defend itself against a perceived threat. So your sympathetic nervous system just kicks in, and your eyes are or your pupils are dilated, and your heart rate's pumping. You feel your carotids just thumping in your neck. So that's what that is. Stage 2 is resistance. That's the individual beginning to cope with the stress. So you may not like it, you may not want to accept it, but it starts to sink in a little. And then stage 3, that's exhaustion. So this is the prolonged exposure to the same stressors over and over and over and over leads to the exhaustion of the individual's ability to resist and adapt to stress. This happens a lot in fire and EMS. This is why people end up with heart problems, with cardiovascular issues and obesity and diabetes, and they can't sleep because they're having dreams. And this is all of this piles up, 20, 30 years of this, and we wonder why the average life of a firefighter or paramedic is only in their 60s. So periods of rest and recovery are paramount. They are more than necessary. But stress is also what helps us function optimally. I've joked around with my friends before, and I've said the best pre-workout's a good dose of epinephrine from stress. And that's so true. If you're stressed out, you typically function at a high level. All right, so shift work. There's always going to be shift work in EMS. There are different variations of it depending on where you work. You may have different choices. You may be on a California schedule. You may be on a 24/48s. You may be on 24/72s. You may be working 313s, 412s, 410s, or 5 days a week. It's all over the place. However, the one that hurts us the worst are the overnight shifts, the 24s, the 48s, because I can tell you right now in the state of Georgia, and if I had everybody who's listening to this video raise your hand if you're working 48s or 36-hour shifts, then a lot of hands would be raised. But unfortunately, the pay is so low for what we do, we have to work second jobs. And it's very, very, very easy to find a second job in EMS and fire. But unfortunately, that means you're double dipping into the stress. You are double dipping into the sleep deprivation. Your circadian rhythm, which is the biological cycle that occurs in 24 hours intervals, that your sleep cycle gets disturbed and your metabolism gets knocked to pieces. But sleep deprivation is common among people who work at night. So there are different ways to try to fix that on your days off whenever you should be sleeping instead of working. Sleep in a cool, dark place that mimics nighttime environment. Stick to sleeping at your anchor time. So pretty much set the same time every day, night, whatever your shift allows to sleep. Also unwind after your shift in order to rest well. Don't eat a big meal and don't exercise right before you're supposed to go to bed because your mind's going to be going, you'll be jacked. Turn off your phone. Insta-snap tube face tris can wait. I'm telling you that there's so much clickbait on the phones. There are so many different things that make you want to stay awake and watch or YouTube and look at social media and, look at, Susie and Johnny's Facebook pages and, see what they have going on in their lives. And, they're only posting the good. So you're jealous, blah, 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 blah. Don't buy into it. Turn it off. Go to bed. Signs of stress. So each individual is susceptible to different stressors. different signs and different symptoms for everyone. But for the most part, we're going to break it down to 4 different types of signs and symptoms. We'll have physical signs, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral signs. And the term burnout. So, you'll have guys that are like, "Oh, I've been on the ambulance for a year. I'm burned out." You're not burned out. You're not burned out yet. Unless you've literally had every call of every shift, every day was horrible and was a traumatic event. There are people who ride the busiest ambulances north of Atlanta for 30 years and they're just fine. They're not burned out yet. So what we do consider burnout is an extreme end point of stress. That is the boiling point, the tipping point. That is where somebody has literally exhausted all of their ability to adapt to stress. So let's talk about some of these warning signs of excessive stress. So these are the things that are kind of rolling us toward the PTSD stuff. Nausea, vomiting, upset stomach, tremors, feeling uncoordinated, diaphoresis, aching muscles and joints, fatigue, that's a huge one, headaches, that's a big one as well, chest tightness, heart palpitations, rhythm disturbances, all this whole section right here, very common. And then whenever you get over to the cognitive, so how your brain works, your cognition, that's what we're talking about here. Constant confusion. You just don't really know what's going on, and you're just kind of okay, I got the car and drive. I'm not steering it, though. A low attention span, so the inability to really focus on much or remember what you're doing, which ties into the memory problems down here. Poor concentration, calculation difficulties. Some people have those on the regular anyway, but your critical thinking kind of gets impaired whenever you're dealing with so much stress that you can't even see straight. Speaking of disorientation, decreased level of awareness, and also seeing the event over and over and over and over and having horrible dreams. All right. Also, not being able to take ownership over something, blaming everybody else for everything going on in your life. All right. Emotional signs of stress. Absolutely, anxiety is definitely one of them. Denial, fearfulness, panic, survivor's guilt is a huge one. Panic can come intermittently. Uncertainty of feeling, sure, but definitely depression. The feelings of being overwhelmed, abandoned, lost, definitely overwhelmed, because so many paramedics work multiple jobs, like I was saying, and then they still have life going on at home that they have to deal with, and God forbid that they try to go to school, so, which all of you guys are going through right now, which will lead to anger, and also feeling numb. Like, you just really can't feel. You can't feel happy, you can't feel sad, you're just kind of stuck. You're numb. And then behavioral. So this is kind of the end result of all of the problems here. But you'll have a change in activity. And whenever we're talking about activity, we're talking about eating, sleeping. We're talking about all the different types of activities. So you can be hyperactive or hypoactive. So you can eat more, eat less. You can sleep more, sleep less. But social withdrawal, like you're withdrawing from people, suspiciousness of others, change in communication. So the amount of talking that you do goes up or down. Changing in interaction with others. Like, hey, maybe normally you're a very outgoing person, but lately you just want to be by yourself. Change in your eating habits, like I said. If you're a stress eater, you eat your feelings, man, good luck. And vice versa. If you don't eat whenever you have some feelings, good luck. I mean, it's tough. It's very, very, very difficult, and you need to know that that's how you operate so that you can kind of combat it when it happens. Smoking, alcohol intake, or drugs. So all of these are bad. Let's see. Excessive humor, excessive silence, unusual behavior, and crying spells. And when we're talking about crying spells, we're not just talking about sitting there thinking about something until you cry. You're talking about just, You just randomly, it just overtakes you, and you can't stop it. All right. So techniques for managing stress. So make sure that you are not doing something that is strictly a temporary sense of relief. These are the things that will end up being addictive and habitual, because it's instant gratification that comes very quickly. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about substance abuse, overeating or compulsive behaviors, chronic complaining. Some people have that anyway. Freezing out or cutting off loved ones. Avoidance behaviors, where you either avoid something that makes you think of the stress, or you just avoid everyone in general. And also being dishonest about the state of well-being. I'm pretty sure every firefighter, paramedic does that every day. But beneficial and healthy techniques. We can dissipate the accumulation of stress, and we can promote actual recovery by using breathing techniques, reframing our thoughts to think a lot more positively, and maybe even talking to someone, and also just attend to the medical needs of your patients. Think about what you're supposed to be doing in that moment. Also, in the long-term well-being, take care of yourself physically, emotionally, and mentally. I mean, that's easier said than done, but focus on it. Actually do it. Regular exercise and a healthy diet. Do something that you enjoy and find relaxing. So like I said, for me, this is woodworking. This is going out into my garage and building random stuff. My exercise that I've liked to do is boxing. I really enjoy boxing. It's great. It makes me feel a lot better about everything. And create a non-EMS circle of friends. It sounds heartless, but it's completely important. You need EMS friends and you need non-EMS friends. You need non-EMS friends to pull you away from the stuff every now and then you need your EMS brothers and sisters who understand what you're going through, and they are willing to listen to you, and they're willing to talk to you, especially if you are surrounding yourself with people who want to get rid of the whole suck it up culture. But definitely try to create positive options for yourself, so that you actually have the ability to deal with this stuff. So again, some specific stressors that you'll have outside of the administrative stuff we were talking about earlier, but daily stressors, small incidents and large incidents and disasters, obviously. And all of this changes how individuals react. So pay attention to yourself, pay attention to your partner, and pay attention to the words they say. If people talk about suicide, or if they start to become withdrawn and they start displaying some of those signs and symptoms we were talking about earlier, start utilizing things like this. I mean, there are critical stress incident debriefing people who specialize in it, and they'll come out to you, and typically they are first responders themselves. And also the Code Green campaign. They have a good website where you can go and look at what kind of resources you have to choose from. But for the most part, you can also have psychological professionals, psychology professionals actually come to the firehouse. If you have an incident that affected a lot of people, such as, if there was a patient who didn't survive a house fire, they burned up, and let's say that it was a kid, and everybody on that fire felt completely defeated, and they felt lifeless and hopeless and felt like they were failures. But you know what? They were still on shift. They brush their gear off, they rinse everything down, clean their tools, put the hose back on the truck, restock the ambulance, and then they go back in service for another call. That's the moment whenever you can get some of those psychological professionals to the station to help them out. That's it for Chapter 4. Read and look for Chapter 5.